The evolution of ESG criteria. In this section, we will cover a very basic introduction on how ESG originated and its relevance to the modern world. So, stakeholder, capitalism, etc. Next, let's start. Let's get to it. The origin of ESG and stakeholder capitalism. It was in 2005 in a paper called Who Cares Wins, in which corporate and institutional investors were urged to think about responsible investing from a more strategic viewpoint. Before this, responsible investment existed, but there were no guidelines available and there were no definitions available. In this white paper, the UN hoped that it could provide some tangible talking points or some criteria in which they could focus they could focus on. So the ESG criteria, the environmental, social, and governance criteria were introduced. The idea was to reduce the negative impact of the corporate activities as much as possible and improve the positive impact of the same of corporate activities. In this context, there is something known as stakeholder capitalism that also happened. Stakeholder capitalism is a valuable concept. It was in 2019 in the Business Roundtable Declaration Conference of USA, a conference in the USA that business leaders from the US promised or declared that the purpose of a corporation is to deliver value for all their stakeholders. Business Roundtable Declaration of 2019 regarding the purpose of a corporation, that's what it is known as. This declaration stated that while each of our individual companies serves its own corporate purpose, we share a fundamental commitment to all of our stakeholders. So, as you can see, this statement declared that business leaders were committed to delivering value to customers, investing in employees, and dealing ethically with suppliers, as well as supporting communities that they worked in. In very simple words, this means that, in very simple words, that every stakeholder was valuable. So, as you can see, this statement redefined the purpose of a corporation to include an expanded definition of a stakeholder. Diversity and inclusion was prominently mentioned in this paper. So some of the signatories to this statement included Amazon.com CEO and founder Jeffrey Bezos, Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, BlackRock Incorporated CEO Lawrence Fink, and many other signatories. You can look up the website for all the signatories that have ratified this declaration. ESG investment and other forms of responsible investing. Like I told you, responsible investing already existed. It was just not well defined. So I'm briefly explaining a few concepts in responsible investing. So there was something called a social responsible investing, or it is still called that. It refers to the investment in firms that meet a certain standard of ethical, social, and environmental preservation. SRI strategies in general are mostly negative screens. That is, the practice is to exclude companies that managers believe are not doing business that is good for the society. For example, some companies refuse to invest in any company related to the tobacco industry. Impact investing, generally speaking, refers to the practice of investing in companies or assets or funds that are expected to have a positive impact, social or environmental impact in addition to financial returns. For example, funds that only invest in renewable energy based companies, or funds that would only invest in tech companies that are solving some development country problem, or an equity investment in a company that helps remove plastic waste from the ocean. These are some examples of impact investing. If you want to look up a company like that, I'll give you some examples in the future. Next is corporate social responsibility, or CSR. Corporate social responsibility refers to the outside of regular business activities that a company might undertake in order to fulfill its responsibility as a member of the community that it belongs to. CSR is not well defined and it could be any kind of activity. For example, a company organizing a drive to donate winter coats to the homeless is a CSR activity, while somebody helping fix rural area roads in a rural area or bring Wi-Fi in rural areas could also be an example of CSR activity, if they're not doing it for profits, that is. CSR activity is mostly voluntary. However, some countries such as India have mandatory requirements that firms allocate a certain percentage of their profits to CSR. Corporate charity, of course, refers to charity in the form of donations. It doesn't include charities that you would give to elections or something like that. I'm not very clear on that though. Next is double or triple bottom line. These refer to the practice of evaluating the performance of a company using parameters other than just the financial parameter. So financial parameter being one bottom line. The second bottom line would be the social impact that the company might have. So if you consider both bottom lines to evaluate the performance of a company, it would be double bottom line. And then if you add the environmental impact, then it would be the triple bottom line. So these are accounting frameworks basically to help understand the impact of a company on the society. So I'll explain the need for double and triple bottom lines and ESG in the next slide. The relevance of ESG. Often the criterion of financial performance takes over other interests in the society. Business have private costs and social costs. Private costs are borne by the business as the total cost of manufacturing and sale of goods and services, including marketing, everything that costs to run the business, while social costs are the total costs that are borne by the society. To give you an example, making cars is the cost of making cars is borne by the private manufacturer, who will show it in their cost part of their balance sheet. So they pay for the raw materials, labor, arbitrage, etc. However, in this the whole activity of producing cars, delivering them, and then having somebody drive them, although the customers are responsible for it, it has environmental costs in terms of pollution in the process of manufacturing, such as in the process of manufacturing. So all the carbon emissions that might come out of manufacturing a car would be counted as the environmental impact of that business. This environmental impact is not counted in any way unless you introduce a carbon tax, or you require businesses to accrue carbon credit. So these emissions, they are a cost to the society. And ESG integration, so obviously the social costs are higher than the private costs, so there is a gap between them. ESG integration is one way of incentivizing or narrowing the cost or closing this gap. So this is a chart that will explain whatever I just said. MSC is the marginal social cost. That's the total cost of producing a good. MPC is the marginal private cost, or the total cost accrued just by the private company. So the society, while all the raw materials etc. come from the society, Businesses pay to buy those raw materials, the labor, etc., but they do not pay for the emissions that happen in the process of this manufacturing. So to close this gap, you have ESG regulations. So this is the if you want to know more about the subject, this is the marginal private benefit. As a consumer, you might have to um, you might drive a car, etc. It has a social benefit also in terms of labor, etc. So you can't shut down industries completely. They have a social benefit in terms of employment, etc., keeping the economy running. That point where the benefit includes the benefit and the cost of making that car, the social benefit and the social cost of the making the car, they uh, they joined this point on the that is the point where you start where your taxation for these uh, the emissions, etc., should stop. All right. So I'm pretty sure if you've studied investing, you would understand that concept. It is not that necessary to understand that chart so much, but this is important. Next is a stakeholder in ESG context. So as I told you, the definition of a stakeholder is expanded. For in the context of a company, previously investors or creditors and key executives and managers would be considered as stakeholders. However, in an ESG context, almost all of the stakeholders would be considered equal. Of course, every corporation defines their stakeholders differently, but in the context of ESG, included some of the expanded list of stakeholders. Basically, local communities and employees and consumers have been added as stakeholders. So all these are so consumers, employees, creditors, local communities, suppliers, government, and executives. Additional reading. Let's hope you